If you ask almost anyone what their ultimate pie-in-the-sky goal in life is, the honest answer is usually some variation of making enough money so they never have to work a single day again.
Right. Yeah. The absolute dream.
Exactly. I mean, we treat work as a disease, and retirement is sort of the cure. The cultural ideal, the dream you and I are supposedly striving for, is the hammock, the beach, the absolute uninterrupted absence of responsibility.
It really is the defining neurosis of modern labor economics. We've culturally positioned our jobs as this tragic obstacle standing between us and our real lives.
Yeah, like life only happens after 5 p.m.
Exactly. The assumption is that the natural perfected state of humanity is total inactivity. But the source material we're diving into today argues that this dream of doing absolutely nothing, it isn't paradise.
No, not at all.
Right. In fact, it argues that this desire for total idleness is actually a symptom of a deeply broken understanding of what it means to be human.
And that is exactly what we're getting into today. Welcome to the deep dive. We are immersing ourselves in an excerpt from the book Dignity of Labor, Missionary at Workplace.
Specifically, we're looking at a fascinating chapter titled Episode 2, Work Existed Before the Fall.
And our mission for this deep dive, for everyone listening, is to fundamentally dismantle the misconception that work is a necessary evil or some kind of cosmic penalty.
Because if you fundamentally misunderstand the origin of a thing, you will inevitably misuse it.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, the framework presented here challenges the notion that labor was a consequence of humanity's failure. Instead, it positions labor as the very reason for humanity's existence in the first place.
Which brings me to a massive point of friction I had when I was reviewing these notes.
Okay, let's unpack this. What was the friction?
Well, if we look at the historical theological concept of the Garden of Eden, which is the baseline for paradise in the Genesis narrative, the popular imagination pictures it exactly like that all-inclusive beach resort we were just talking about.
Right, the hammock in the garden.
Exactly. We imagine early humans just wandering around completely carefree, occasionally reaching up to pluck a grape off a vine when they get hungry. It's an environment of pure passive consumption.
And that image is precisely what this chapter targets right out of the gate. The premise here is radically different.
How so?
Well, the author explicitly states, and I quote, "The Garden of Eden was not a vacation retreat. It was a vineyard of purpose."
A vineyard of purpose.
Yeah, it completely inverts the capitalist idea that the reward for success is getting to stop working. Paradise wasn't a place of passive consumption. It was an environment designed for active, intentional contribution.
A vineyard of purpose. I really want to linger on that for a second, because the implications for us are staggering. It means work was pre-serpent, pre-shame, and pre-sweat.
It was part of the original design.
But frankly, I'm struggling to imagine any version of labor that doesn't feel like, well, labor. Like, are we talking about a physical difference in human biology at this theoretical point in
Well, it's
history?
psychological difference.
Yeah, exactly, like how early humans perceived effort. Because a vineyard requires pruning, harvesting, and maintenance. That's a lot of work.
To answer that, you have to look at the timeline the text establishes, which is the crux of the entire theological argument here. Labor predates the fall.
Right.
For those analyzing the narrative structure of Genesis, the fall is that pivotal moment where the environment fractures and sin is introduced. If the mandate to work arrives before that fracture, then labor is inextricably woven into the original perfect design.
It's a feature, not a bug.
Exactly. It is a feature, not a bug.
And the text points directly to Genesis 2.15 to back this up.
Yeah.
It notes that the man was put in the garden specifically to, and this is, quote, work it and take care of it.
The verbs there are critical. The original Hebrew words used are abad and shamar.
Abad and shamar, which
Right.
translate to work, to serve, to keep, to cultivate. It implies intense responsibility and stewardship.
So no lounging on the beach? None. The human wasn't placed in the ecosystem to be a tourist. He was placed there to be the chief gardener. The command to work was a calling long before it ever felt like a consequence.
Okay, but if we accept that premise, that we, you and I, are biologically and spiritually wired for labor, where does that wiring come from?
That's the logical next question.
Right, like why design an organism whose highest state of fulfillment requires burning calories and expending effort?
Well, the architecture of the Genesis account suggests we have to look at the architect himself. The prevailing argument here is that work did not begin with humanity. It began with the divine.
And this is where the text gets deeply subversive, I think. Because when most people imagine the origin of the universe or the concept of a supreme being, the image is often one of static majesty.
Floating on a cloud.
Right. Maybe passive worship, singing angels hovering in a celestial glow. But the Genesis narrative doesn't open with a divine choir practice.
No, it opens with a blue-collar work week.
Exactly. A literal 6-day work week.
What's fascinating here is the profound contrast to other ancient Near Eastern creation myths. If you look at the Babylonian Enuma Elish or the Epic of Atrahasis, the gods create humans specifically because the gods are tired of doing the grunt work.
Wait, really? The gods just wanted a break?
Seriously, humanity is created as a slave race to do the chores of maintaining the universe so the deities can finally rest.
So in those cultures, work is literally for the lower class. It's for the mortals.
Yeah,
And the gods get to lounge around.
exactly. But the Genesis narrative flips that entirely on its head. The supreme being in this text is a worker.
That's a huge paradigm shift.
Huge. The text highlights the specific actions. Forming, dividing, naming, shaping. Bringing order out of chaos is intense, creative labor.
So designing an ecosystem, establishing the laws of physics, separating light from dark, that is the ultimate divine productivity.
Right. God doesn't delegate the heavy lifting. He initiates it.
Forming, dividing, naming, shaping. It sounds less like a magic trick and more like an unimaginably complex construction project.
It really does.
But then we hit the seventh day. And this is the classic counterargument. People point to the Sabbath and say, look, God rested. That proves the ultimate goal of work is to finish it so you can finally go to sleep.
But the text argues that is a fundamental misreading of the concept of divine rest. Omnipotence, by definition, does not experience fatigue.
Okay, that makes sense. A limitless being doesn't get tired.
Right. The creator didn't finish the universe, wipe the cosmic sweat from his brow, and collapse on the couch.
So what is the mechanism of that rest? Then why stop?
The rest wasn't a recovery from exhaustion. It was the establishment of a cadence. Think of it like music.
Music. Okay, I'm tracking.
The rests on a piece of sheet music aren't there because the musician is too tired to play the next note.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The rests are an integral part of the composition. They give the notes meaning. The divine pattern establishes a rhythm of creation and contemplation.
That musical analogy is brilliant. The silence makes the song.
Exactly. Work is embedded into the human design by a God who works, and the rest is a structured boundary to appreciate that work, not a desperate escape from it.
And that leads directly into a piece of evidence the author uses from the New Testament. It's a quote from John 5:17, where Jesus says, "My Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working."
That statement is cosmically significant when you tie it back to the Genesis blueprint. It confirms that the divine labor never actually ceased.
So the 6 days were just the beginning.
Right. The initial phase of forming the raw materials might have concluded on the sixth day, but the sustaining of the universe, the ongoing guidance of history, the upholding of the laws of nature, that requires continuous active engagement.
The divine work ethic is perpetual.
Yes.
Which brings us to a major psychological paradox for you and me. If the Creator never ceases working, and if we are supposedly designed in that image, if we are image bearers tasked with continuing that rhythm of productivity, why are we so obsessed with stopping?
It's a great question.
I mean, look at studies on retirement, and the data is often grim. Rates of cognitive decline, depression, and loss of identity absolutely skyrocket when people abruptly stop working.
We know scientifically that humans need a purpose to wake up for.
Yet our cultural North Star is still that beach hammock. Why?
It reveals a profound cognitive dissonance. We treat work as the barrier to our happiness, while our biology and psychology clearly demonstrate that a lack of meaningful work destroys us.
It's like we're fighting our own programming.
Precisely. The framework we are exploring suggests that to desire a life completely free of labor is actually a desire to shed a core component of our humanity. We are built to cultivate. When we have nothing to cultivate, we wither.
But I have to push back here because this can easily sound like toxic productivity dressed up in theological language.
I can see that.
If work is this holy, divine, perfect thing, why is burnout an absolute epidemic? Why do the Sunday scaries exist? If labor is part of paradise, why does my 9 to 5 usually feel like the exact opposite of Eden?
That is the pivotal question of this entire deep dive. And to answer it, we have to examine what the text identifies as the fracture.
The breaking point.
Yes. We have to understand the mechanism of the curse and how it fundamentally altered the physics of human labor. We need to contrast the nature of work before the fall with the reality of work after it.
Okay, let's unpack that contrast.
Yeah.
Because the author draws a very sharp, very specific line. Let's start with the pre-fall economics. What was the original state of labor actually like?
The author describes it as an act of dominion, not drudgery. But we need to be careful with that word dominion.
Yeah, because in a modern context, that sounds a lot like exploitation or domination.
Right, but in the ancient Near Eastern context, exercising dominion meant acting as the benevolent steward of a king. It meant ensuring the realm flourished.
So it wasn't about extracting every ounce of value from the earth, it was about orchestrating its potential.
Exactly. The text paints this picture where the earth responded to human touch, plants yielded effortlessly, and creation resonated with human intent.
It sounds almost like a state of incredibly low entropy, like the work was just frictionless.
Yes. Have you ever watched a master craftsman or a brilliant musician in a state of absolute flow, where the tool or the instrument ceases to be an object and becomes an extension of their own body?
Yeah, where they aren't even thinking about the mechanics of it anymore.
Right. There is intense effort, yes, but there is zero friction between the intent of the mind and the execution of the hand.
The flow state. The psychology of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. It's that rare moment where the challenge perfectly matches your skill and time just seems to vanish.
Exactly.
And you're saying that in the pre-fall design, according to this text, that state wasn't a rare psychological phenomenon. It was the default operating system of human labor.
Precisely. It was perfectly fulfilling because there was a complete absence of futility. Every ounce of effort expended resulted in the exact intended outcome.
The environment just cooperated.
The environment cooperated perfectly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The fracture happens. The narrative reaches Genesis chapter 3. Sin enters the equation, and the entire operating system crashes.
Everything changes.
The text points to Genesis 3.17, where the decree is handed down. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat food from it.
And this is where most modern interpretations miss the mark completely. Read the decree closely. Identify the exact target of the curse.
Cursed is the ground, not the work, the ground.
Yes, that is the most critical distinction in this entire deep dive. The act of working the divine calling to cultivate, build, and steward remained perfectly intact.
It was still a holy mandate.
Exactly. What broke was the environment in which that work took place. The ground was cursed.
It's like writing perfectly clean code, but being forced to run it on a corrupted operating system.
Oh, that's an excellent metaphor.
Right, because the code itself, the drive to create, to build, to organize, is good. But the output is full of bugs, crashes, and errors because the environment is compromised.
Environmental entropy. The mechanism of the curse was the introduction of resistance. The frictionless flow state was shattered.
So suddenly, cultivation required fighting against the natural decay of the universe.
Right. The earth no longer yielded effortlessly. It produced thorns and thistles, tools rust, crops fail, communication breaks down in the boardroom.
So the work didn't transform from a blessing into a punishment. Labor simply became toil.
Exactly. Toil is labor plus futility.
Labor plus futility. I need to write that down.
We still possess that innate divine drive to bring order to chaos, but because we are operating in a fractured ecosystem, our efforts are met with relentless resistance.
And that is the true source of burnout.
Yes. We aren't exhausted just because we are expending energy. We are existentially exhausted because our energy so often feels wasted.
It's like trying to run a marathon in waist-deep water.
Perfect analogy.
The mechanical desire to run is completely natural. The muscles are designed for it. But the environment is fighting you every single step of the way. You aren't tired of running. You're tired of the water.
And that distinction changes everything about how we view our modern workplace. The Sunday scaries, the dread of Monday morning. It isn't a hatred of creation.
It's grief.
Exactly. It is a deep psychological grieving over the futility of the cursed ground. We hate the friction, the office politics, the meaningless bureaucracy, the bullshit jobs that don't seem to produce anything of value.
We hate the thorns.
We hate the thorns.
So what does this all mean for us? We understand the theory. The original design was joyful dominion, and the modern friction we feel is the curse of entropy on the environment, not a curse on the concept of work itself.
Right.
But theory doesn't answer emails. How do you take this ancient framework and apply it to a very real, very frustrating Tuesday afternoon when the server crashes or a client is just screaming at you?
This is where the material transitions into what it calls a modern reflection. It suggests that if we want to reclaim any sense of joy or purpose in our daily jobs, we have to address our fundamental alignment.
Alignment, okay.
The core issue isn't that you have to work. The issue is that you might be working with a profound disconnect from the divine purpose of that work.
I found the quote in the text for this. It says, "Work that partners with God's design brings fulfillment. Work that ignores his presence brings fatigue."
We can call that the rule of alignment. When we view our daily tasks purely in secular terms, merely as a transactional means to a paycheck or as a necessary evil to endure until 5 p.m.
Which is how most of us view it.
Right. When we do that, we are operating in a closed system. We are ignoring the presence of the architect who designed us for this exact function.
And that misalignment is what generates soul-level fatigue.
Exactly. You are fighting the friction of the cursed ground without the anchor of divine purpose.
I want to get hyper-practical here because the author uses a concept that I think is incredibly clarifying for you and me. They talk about spheres.
Yes, spheres of influence.
The text argues that just as the first human was placed in a specific, localized garden to cultivate it, we are each given specific spheres to steward and influence today.
It democratizes the concept of holy work. It strips away the artificial divide we've built between the sacred and the secular. In this framework, your garden isn't a literal plot of agricultural land in the Middle East.
Your garden is your immediate context.
Right.
So for the person listening right now, your sphere might be managing a team of software developers. It might be writing Python scripts. It might be nursing patients in a cardiac ICU or framing houses or teaching 8th grade math.
Any of those.
And the radical claim here is that when you show up to that job, you are not just performing a secular task to appease the economy. You are bringing order to chaos. You are actively pushing back against the entropy of the universe.
You are executing the Genesis mandate. When a nurse cleans a wound and administers medication, they are fighting the physical decay of the cursed ground.
Wow. Yeah.
When a programmer debugs a system to make it run efficiently, they are bringing order to digital chaos. When a teacher takes a confused mind and instills understanding, they are cultivating human potential.
That is not secular work.
No, that is deeply sacred stewardship.
I love that. It completely redefines what it means to be a professional. You are, in a very real way, doing the Genesis 2.15 work of taking care of it.
Exactly.
But I can hear a skeptical listener asking, does this mean I'm supposed to just accept terrible working conditions or a toxic boss? Because work is holy.
Not at all. Recognizing the dignity of labor does not mean ignoring the reality of the cursed ground. A toxic workplace is a prime example of the thorns and thistles of human brokenness.
It's the friction.
Right. The mandate to cultivate your sphere might actually mean standing up against exploitation, improving the conditions of your team, or even realizing that your specific sphere needs to change.
So stewardship implies profound responsibility, not passive victimhood.
Exactly.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the ultimate point the author is driving at seems to be about redemption. The text says, to return to Eden is not to escape labor, but to redeem its meaning.
That is the paradigm shift right there. We cannot escape the friction. Winning the lottery and moving to an island doesn't solve the existential void.
It usually just accelerates cognitive decline because you've abandoned your post.
Precisely. Redeeming the meaning of labor means waking up on a Monday and realizing that the spreadsheets, the meetings, the chaotic classrooms, they are not your punishment.
They are your assigned vineyard.
They are the specific coordinates where you have been deployed to partner with the ongoing work of the Creator. It changes a difficult customer interaction from a purely draining experience into an opportunity to inject a tiny bit of divine patience and order into a fractured moment.
That is powerful. It doesn't magically remove the pain, obviously.
No, of course not. Your back might still ache at the end of the day. The project might still fail. The ground is still cursed.
But the internal narrative shifts.
Yes. You are no longer a prisoner serving a sentence. You are a missionary of order in a chaotic world. The dignity isn't found in the prestige of your corporate title. It is rooted in the fact that your active engagement with reality is a reflection of the divine nature.
That is a phenomenal place to land the plane. To briefly summarize the massive territory we've covered in this deep dive, we started by dismantling the myth of the hammock, the idea that paradise is just an endless vacation.
Right. We explored the ancient Near Eastern context to show how radically different the Genesis narrative is. It presents a God who is the first worker, establishing a rhythm of productive labor and intentional rest.
We also clarified the mechanics of the fall. We established the work itself was never cursed. The entropy, the friction, the thorns, those are afflictions on the environment, not a condemnation of the human drive to create.
Which fundamentally changes how we view modern burnout.
And finally, we challenged you to identify your specific sphere. to see your current job, whatever it is, not as a secular waiting room for the weekend, but as your assigned plot of the modern garden.
The challenge is to view the mundane tasks of your week through an ancient divine lens, to push back against the chaos.
So tomorrow morning, when you fire up your laptop or you grab your tools or you walk through the doors of your workplace, try to strip away the dread. Look at it as your vineyard of purpose. You are there to work it, and you are there to take care of it.
And as we close, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to chew on.
Oh, I love these. Lay it on us.
It builds on everything we've unpacked about the original frictionless state of human labor. We talked about how, before the fracture, work was a perfect flow state where the environment yielded effortlessly to human intent.
Right. Low entropy. Absolute harmony between the worker and the work.
Well, consider the modern world. Consider our relentless, almost obsessive drive to invent, to automate, and to build artificial general intelligence.
AI.
We often frame this pursuit as a product of human laziness or a desire to maximize corporate profit. But what if it's something deeper?
What do you mean?
What if humanity's obsession with creating technology to remove the friction from our labor isn't just about economics?
Right.
What if it is actually a deep subconscious theological yearning?
A yearning for what?
A desperate, hardwired attempt to rebuild that pre-fall world, to code our way back to a state of unburdened, joyful creation where the environment simply responds to our voice.
Wait, really? Are we just trying to build a digital Eden because we remember, on some genetic or spiritual level, what it felt like to work without the curse?
It's entirely possible.
That is an incredible thought. To think all our tech is just us trying to find our way back to the garden. That is definitely a deep dive for another day. Thanks for exploring the architecture of purpose with us. We will catch you next time.